Welcome to Game Changers with Molly Fletcher, where we take you behind the scenes with peak performers to learn what makes them tick and discover how you can apply their lessons to your life. I'm your host, Molly Fletcher. Have you ever tried to build a new habit or break an old one and had zero success? The problem, it isn't you, it's your approach. Today, BJ Fogg, the author of the New York Times bestseller Tiny Habits, joins me to share his breakthrough method for building habits quickly and easily. Based on 20 years of research and BJ's experience coaching more than 40,000 people through the process, Tiny Habits will change the way you think about human behavior. In our conversation today, BJ gives us a step-by-step guide to help us design habits and make them stick. Best of all, you'll abandon the feelings of guilt and shame and actually feel good about making the change. Whether you want to lose weight, de-stress, or be more productive, you can apply the Tiny Habits framework to your life immediately. Start small and get big results. Let's dive in. Here's my conversation with Stanford University habit expert, BJ Fogg. Well, BJ, thanks so much for coming on. Let's just start here, right? What's the big idea, right, behind your book, Tiny Habits?
Wow. Well, I think the big idea would be, yes, you can change. Creating habits is not as hard as you've been led to believe, and it can be pretty easy and fast and even fun.
Wow. Well, I love how you talk about that and you make it fun. You know, you've coached, this is cool. You've personally coached 40,000 people in Tiny Habits since 2011. What sort of sparked this journey for you? And what was the transformation you were seeing, right?
Yeah, so I stopped counting at 40,000. It's going to be a lot more than that now. You know, at first, the Tiny Habits method in some ways was just me hacking my own behavior, my own habits. I reached a point where I was super stressed out about conferences I was in charge of, global conferences, and people were coming to Stanford for it, and I was in charge. I was stressed about there's a startup I did that just didn't work, and I was still in the aftermath of that. There were personal things going on and so on. So I was just like, man, BJ, you got to get your act back together. I'd gained weight. I wasn't sleeping well. So I started hacking my own behavior, using my own behavior model in this way. And it led to this method that I named Tiny Habits to myself. And then after a year of that, I just thought it'd be a handful of friends. Like, hey, I'm going to teach you how to create habits. And then that was 2011. Then one thing led to another. And I just kept teaching people week after week and measuring the results every weekend. And then it just kept going because, Molly, I'm not getting paid for this. It was not a formal Stanford research project. Like I said, it was kind of me just hacking my own behavior, then sharing. But then week after week, seeing the results, and then also getting the emails from people saying, thank you so much. You've changed my life. I've tried all sorts of ways to change. This is the only thing that worked for me. How could I stop? I stop? So I just kept doing it. So it really, in some ways, was accident / labor of love, and didn't know it'll culminate and eventually in a book.
And a big part of what you teach is how to break down big aspirations, right? I love this, into really tiny habits. Can you start by delineating between aspirations, outcomes, and behaviors, and how we should be thinking about them?
Yes, this is such a good question. So in my work, I don't use the word goal. The word goal is okay to use, but it's not a very good technical term. So instead, think about, and Molly, you know this because you read the book, but for people listening, instead, think about these three words. You have an outcome. An outcome is like a landing spot. It's like, oh, I want to finish reading this book by the end of the day, or I want to get my taxes submitted by Monday. That's an outcome. And there's behaviors you do to reach that outcome. Then you have a category that I call aspiration. that's fuzzier. That's more abstract. Like, I want to sleep better, or I want to strengthen my relationship. So that's not a behavior, it's something you're working toward, but it's not that measurable. And then the third category is behavior, a specific behavior or an action. It's something that you could do right now. Like, I could put my phone on Do Not Disturb. I can tidy up this remote control. I can open the window. Those are all specific behaviors. Now, specific behaviors, that's what you need to design for. And within that category of behaviors, you have habits. Habits are a subset of behavior. So you can design for habits or behaviors that will take you to the aspiration of sleeping better or the outcome of finishing the book. So it doesn't matter whether it's an aspiration or outcome. You always need to break it down to specific behaviors, and some of those are habits, in order to reach the aspiration or the outcome.
Boy, that's so interesting, the way that you break that down. And I want to dig into that more because obviously this all attaches to the way we can make change, right, around things that, as you talk about, which I love, is help people do what they actually really want to do.
Yeah. And like, let's say you're managing somebody and they're not, you're saying, be more productive. Okay, that's an aspiration. And if you just try to motivate somebody like, be more productive, that's not going to work very well. They don't know what behaviors to do. And as the more you push on that, the more frustrated that person's going to get. Just like in, someone's own personal life, like, oh, I want to lose weight. I'm just going to motivate myself to lose weight. And the more you focus on motivating that abstract thing, the more frustrated you get. So instead, you need to work with your employee or colleague, like, here is the behavior or set of behaviors or set of habits that you do to be more productive. So you've just really got to break it down into something that's actionable and specific. And that's why I don't like the word goal, because it can mean outcome, it can mean aspiration, it can mean specific behavior. So if it can mean all of those things, it's not a very useful word. So instead, it's better to use specific words because it clarifies our thinking and it clarifies the way we communicate.
Mm-hmm. It sure does. I want to just really quickly help make sure our listeners, your background is as a behavioral scientist. So let's dig into the elements of behavior, sort of using your B equals MAP, B equals MAP model. Can you explain that to our listeners?
Yes. So it turns out, good news, everybody, human behavior is not as complicated as it appears on the surface. All behavior comes down to three components: motivation to do the behavior, ability to do the behavior. That means how hard or easy it is. And the third one is a prompt. The prompt is the reminder, the cue, the call to action. And when those three things come together at the same moment, a behavior will happen. Good behaviors, bad behaviors, good habits, bad habits are all a combination of motivation, ability, and prompt. Now, and I write it out, I call it the behavior model. I write it out as B equals MAP. It's not literally an equation, it's a model. And that model applies to all behaviors in all cultures of all people. The complexity or the variability comes within the components of like what motivates people in this culture or in this age group or with this kind of psychology. So M, A, and P, then you can break those down and you can get a lot more nuanced in those components.
And we all have habits, right, that we want to create in our lives. How can we use this framework? So use this specific framework to design for habit change, right? Like maybe you could think of a real example that you think our listeners would really resonate with. Where would they start as they think about something in their own lives that they want to change, and then they think about the B equals MAP model?
Well, one of my close friends, Amy, she was starting a company, and she really, really needed to get this company to work because the custody of her daughters, she felt, was at stake. Anyway, so she was super motivated, but she was just spinning her wheels and being overwhelmed and focusing on the wrong things, like designing her logo rather than selling. And so what she did was she used the tiny habits method to build momentum. And the way it worked for her was this. After she dropped her daughter off at school, she would pull over and write on a Post-it note the most important business task for that day. So the tiny habit recipe, and in tiny habits, you design, we call it a recipe. It's a way to design it into your life. So hers would be something like, after I drop off my daughter, I will write down the most important task of the day. Other recipes might sound like, after I finish a meeting, I will put my to-do items on my task list. After I turn off my computer, I'll take 3 deep breaths and relax. So hers was about, how do I identify the most important thing that day? And that, Molly, was the game changer. She started getting things done. She started making sales, getting traction, and it led to just a total turnaround from her just spinning her wheels or getting distracted to building more momentum and growing her business in a great way.
So for our listeners, it break down the behavior and the motivation, ability, and prompt in that example specifically. The behavior was pulling over, right, after she dropped her daughter off.
Yeah. So the new habit was because she wanted to be more productive in things that matter. Okay. So you could imagine her aspiration was be more productive in things that matter. There's a whole bunch of ways of doing that. She selected, well, I just need to identify the most important task. And if I do that every day, then that's going to lead me to the aspiration of being more productive. So that's the behavior, write down, the one task to do that day. Then she was already motivated to do it. So she didn't have to manipulate motivation. She already wanted to do that. And she made it so easy. And this is what you do in tiny habits. You increase ability by making it really easy. She didn't have to spend hours on it. She just had to write down the most important thing. She didn't have to do it. She would just write it down. So that's covering motivation. It's accounting for ability, making it really, really simple. And then the last thing that's lacking is a prompt. And in the tiny habits way, you don't use Post-its or alarms to prompt you. Instead, you find what it comes after. Through some trial and error, she figured out, this comes after I drop off my daughter. So dropping off her daughter at school was her prompt to then write down the most important task. And that's what led. So in every recipe that's after I drop off my daughter, I will write down the task. That first statement, after I drop off my daughter, you're finding a routine you already do that will remind you or prompt you to do the new habit that you want.
Yeah, I mean, and I love how you talk about that in tiny habits. It's you break it down into the ABCs, you say, anchor behavior, and then talk about celebration, right? The simplicity. Yeah, I mean, but you make it so simple, which is huge, right?
But this is the most controversial of all, but it's maybe the most important. So we'll keep going with the Amy example. So after she writes down the one important thing to do, she could say, "You go, girl." She could say that to herself, like cheering herself on, creating a feeling of success, a positive emotion. What she's doing with that celebration is she is self-reinforcing. She is deliberately creating the habit. She's causing her brain through emotion to take note of what she just did and cause that new habit to become more automatic. So in tiny habits, we call that, way to go, or good for me, or you think about your purpose and how you're succeeding. That emotion, whatever you do to create that feeling of success, we call celebration. So that's where the ABC comes from. So A is the anchor. After I drop off my daughter at school, so the anchor is something you already do. It's firmly in your life. This is B, here's the behavior. So in this case, it's habit. I will write down the one thing I need to do. And then to wire it in, you celebrate. Now, once Amy had the habit of just automatically drop off my daughter, pull over in the spot, write down, she no longer needs to celebrate because the habit has wired in. But until it becomes automatic, until it becomes something you do without thinking, then celebration is the way to accelerate the speed of habit formation. You are hacking your brain. So this new thing, this new behavior becomes a habit. A habit is a behavior you do automatically. So it transitions from a decision or just a regular behavior to becoming a habit, and celebration is the way you make that happen.
There's so many assumptions around habits, right? And you just talked about that they're built around, willpower or motivation. Why don't these work? Like, break these down, right? Why aren't essential to change into tiny habits?
Yeah, there's so many myths and assumptions, and I talk about some of them in the book, but there's even more. My work is mostly about here's how you do it. Here's the right way to do stuff, not like here's all the wrong things and why we ended up here. So, but in our culture, we have inherited these myths that actually mislead people from creating habits quickly and easily. And just the idea that habit formation is hard, that's not true. It can be really easy. Just the idea that it takes lots of time, that's a myth. That's not true. Just the idea that at a certain age, you can no longer create habits, that's not true either. So what I'm really hoping for in my work, and Molly, thank you for inviting me here on your show, is to help people see how to do it effectively and to avoid falling into the traps that the myths set up for us.
Sure, which is easy to do, right? I mean, because
Oh,
we've been
yeah.
drilled this 30 days, 21 days, whatever is how long it takes to sort of change a behavior. And you talk about that myth, right? And we see that. It's 21 days to create a habit. I mean, you are obviously, a Stanford professor as well. Your resume is deep and wide, and we shared that on the intro. But tell us a little bit about what the research says about this.
Yeah, wow, we can do a whole show on this. I'll be brief. You can do follow on. There is a hugely selling book out there, and the author actually took my Tiny Habits course in 2013. And so you'll see aspects of my work in this person's book. But in this book and elsewhere, they're perpetuating the idea that it takes 66 days to wire a habit. And that repetition, and this is the point I'm going to attack or undercut, that repetition creates habits. So if you just repeat it 66 days, you'll have a habit. That is not true. If you look at the research cited in that book and by bloggers and elsewhere, and I'll just give the citation, look up Lally, Lally, 2009. That's the study they're citing. That research was set up to show correlation, not causation. So out of that research, and you can just read the abstract, and you don't even have to buy the article. You can read the abstract and see it was not set up to show causality. It's not a causal effect. And in their work, they felt like after 66 days, most people had substantially created the habit. Well, that doesn't mean you repeat for 66 days and it forms. If you do the tiny habits method, I mean, I've seen this since 2011. People are reporting that a habit substantially wires in within 5 days. And the better you are at celebrating, the faster the habit wires in. In other words, the better you are at self-reinforcing through emotion, the faster the habit wires in. The unfortunate thing about the misleading idea that repetition creates habits, not only it being wrong and not supported by any research I can find, is it's like, oh my gosh, it's going to take a long time. Oh my gosh, it's something I have to endure. Behavior change isn't fun. I have to have discipline and willpower and keep going. And none of those things is helpful to people. And if people understand, it's like, oh, I can form habits quickly and easily in this way. And it's not something I need to endure. And therefore, I don't need to procrastinate this effort or this in tiny habits, the fun journey to create habits. I don't have to wait till I'm ready. I can just do it. It's on my side, Molly, and the people that have learned the tiny habits method. I'll just give an analogy, and I'll come back and explain what it feels like. Back in the day, before we could drive, say we were 14 and 15, the idea of driving was like, oh my gosh, and a little bit scary, and it seemed very complicated, right? But then once we learned it, we just get in the car and go from point A to point B. It's like not a big deal. That's how a lot of people feel about behavior change. It's big, it's scary, it's complicated. But once you learn how to do it, you just point A to point B. You just can do it without much effort or in some ways even thinking. It's like, here's this abstract thing I want to achieve. Let me break it down into specific habits. Let me design those habits in the tiny habits way. Let me self-reinforce through celebration. Bam, you're on your way.
You said, emotion, right? You said the word emotion, right? Emotion creates habits. How does emotion factor into habit formation?
Well, the mechanism looks like this. Emotions serve various purposes in our life. One role of emotion is to alert us to something we didn't expect. And in the scientific literature, it's kind of a clunky name, but it's called a reward prediction error. I so wish I could make that simpler, but that's what it's called. So when something happens and we don't get the result we expected, our brain regulates dopamine in a certain way to rewire our cause and effect relationship around it. So if we do a behavior like pouring a glass of water and we feel like surprisingly positive or successful doing that, our brain goes, wow, there's a regulation of dopamine that happens and an actual change in the neurons in our brain to make that behavior more automatic in the future. So an emotion is the signal to pay attention to our brain to go, whoa, let me remap this. So you're actually hacking your brain through that. Now, let me share something. This piece is not my research, but one of my close friends, Vic Strecker, from University of Michigan, he does brain imaging, fMRI stuff. And he was here on our lanai 2 years ago in Maui. And he was talking about the brain imaging he was doing as people thought about their purpose. So he's sitting there and we're chatting. And as he described it, I was like, oh my gosh, this sounds just like how celebration works. I said, Vic, by the way, what one of the celebration types we're having people do is as you, like for me, Molly, one of the most important things is my ability to teach effectively to help people be healthier. So as I'm pouring in that glass of water, my celebration can be thinking about how that helps me achieve my highest purpose, which is be a really great teacher. So if I'm pouring that glass of water and feeling successful, then wow, I'll eventually drink this and it's going to help me succeed. Then I'm calling up the feeling of success deliberately. What Vic told me 3 weeks ago, he's like, yeah, in the brain imaging, when people think about their purpose, it stimulates or highlights the reward center of the brain. Bam. So I was like, there we go. So yes, you can go good for me. You can clap for yourself. There's these but on the other end of the spectrum, you can just simply think very clearly and specifically about your purpose as you're doing that new behavior in order to signal to your brain, cause your brain, the reward center, to go off and help wire that habit in.
In just a minute, we'll get back to the show. But first, I want to invite you to join my group coaching program, Game Changer Leadership Huddles. My coaching program is perfect if you love setting and achieving new goals, if you are committed to personal and professional growth, and if you want to be part of a community that will challenge and support you. Get signed up today at mollyfletcher.com/leadership-huddles and become a part of our growing community. Again, that's mollyfletcher.com/leadership-huddles. And for our podcast listeners, use the discount code GAMECHANGER to get special pricing. I can't wait to see you in the huddles. I love how you talk about, getting rid of the self-trash talk, right? In other words, the stop judging yourself, and you really push people to, embrace feeling good, which sounds sort of simple, right? But it's so different from so much of what we've read or heard about habits.
Yeah, and so very needed. And, I don't advocate that because it's so very needed. I advocate it because that's what works best. You change best by feeling good, not by feeling bad. When you feel good, you open yourself to new experiences. You're more flexible. You're more compassionate with yourself. You're more resilient. All these things you need, to go through hard things and also to create habits. And, maybe that's the most important message of the book. If you're beating yourself up, if you feel bad, if you're sending yourself on a guilt trip, if you're criticizing yourself, you're not in the best mode for changing your habits and your life. And you change best by feeling good, by even for the tiniest of successes, allowing yourself to say, good for me, or allowing yourself to see and feel. Feel is the word, not just see, how this helps you succeed at your highest purpose.
How does tiny habits scale, right? Like, in other words, how does making a tiny behavior change create big outcomes?
I'll give 3 ways. Number one, it's really easy to create habits that are tiny, so you can do lots of them. In the 5-day program that I started in 2011 and still continues today, and it's free and it will always be free, people practice 3 habits. And they're really tiny, so it's not overwhelming to them. And so you could do 3 the next week. Some people do 10 or more, just like you might practice 10 or more songs on the guitar. Yeah, it's a lot, but if that's your style, you can do it. You don't just practice one song, probably. So you can do many, just like planting a bunch of blades of grass. I'm looking over some lawn here. So I think of that as habits that start tiny and stay tiny, but then you have this beautiful lawn. That's one way it scales. Next, habits will grow and like a workout habit. Let's say you say, okay, the tiny version is I'm just going to put on my walking shoes. Well, what happens naturally is you'll start doing more than just putting on your shoes. You'll walk more and more. But the habit's just putting on your shoes, but you're opening the door to do a bigger behavior. So think of a little plant growing bigger. So you get growth. In my own life, you read about this in the book, Molly. One of my habits is after I pee, I will do 2 push-ups. Okay, so that's where it fits, people. After I pee, when I'm at home, not at Stanford, not in hotel rooms or conference centers, I do push-ups. And if I want to do more, I can. And now typically I will do 8, 10, 12, sometimes I'll do 20. So it's bigger than 2, but I don't raise the bar. It's always, if I'm like in a rush, I just do 2, congratulate myself and move on. So that's the second way, is these habits will grow. Floss 1 tooth will end up being flossing all your teeth. The third way is that your identity shifts in that domain. So if I start eating healthy snacks and I feel successful, I will then start thinking of myself, I'm the kind of person who eats healthy snacks. And that identity shift has more of a global impact on our behavior. Oh, I go to some party or mixer. Oh, I don't have a habit designed for that, but I'm the kind of person who eats healthy snacks. Therefore, I eat healthy snacks.
Yeah.
So those are 3 of the ways that tiny can become transformative.
And you talk about that, right? Like, don't,
Yeah.
Type A's will go, I'm every time, I'm going to do 20 push-ups. Well, you could set yourself up for failure, right? So you always talk about start small so that you have some little successes. To your point, you feel good about it.
And the idea is you set the bar low. And if you want to do more day one, like day one, if you want to do more than 2 push-ups, do 20, do 30, knock yourself out. It's awesome. But don't raise the bar. So this is counterintuitive. And some people who summarize tiny habits don't get it quite right. They're like, oh, and then you go to 2 push-ups and 5 push-ups. No. You will naturally be able to do more and you'll be motivated to do more, but you don't change the standard. You keep it low. So even on your hardest of days in the future, you can still succeed and you keep the habit alive.
Are there differences in approach between creating a new habit versus breaking a bad habit?
Yes and no. Let me start with the no part. All behaviors, whether you're starting them or stopping them, will come down to motivation, ability, and prompt. So similarities there. So if you want to stop a habit, your options are remove the motivation, remove ability, or remove the prompt. Now, that's easy to say, but for a lot of these habits that people want to stop, not so easy to do. But the yes is whether you're creating a habit or stopping it, it will always come down to motivation, ability, prompt. The no part is this, where they're very different. Creating habits is quick and fast and pretty straightforward compared to stopping habits that you've struggled with for years. Like you want to stop. For me, I had a problem with popcorn. Stop eating popcorn. Stop, watching too much TV. Stop drinking soda. So those kinds of habits that you've had trouble stopping before, that's more problematic. That's not straightforward. Like, after I drop off my child, I'll write down the note. But what I map out, and I'll just give one word that I think can be helpful, and the word is untangle. So what I advocate is not breaking, and let's not even talk about like breaking bad habits. You untangle them. And that sets up the right expectation that it's a process. It might look really like you have a tangled headphone cord. It might look impossible at the beginning, but it's a process. And if you just go step by step, you will get there. That's how we should look at these kinds of habits we want to get rid of. It's not breaking. It's not a sudden effort that gets it done. That's why even that word is misleading us. It'd be great to get rid of the word break, and we always would just talk about untangling bad habits or untangling unwanted habits.
So what was your approach with the popcorn? Like, walk me through, get me inside of that. So you want to stop? Because I'm sure there's people listening, right? Like, have habits that, gosh, I want to stop. I mean, what did you do to, unless maybe you're still crushing popcorn. I'm not sure, but
no. I had written this and the editors looked at it like, BJ, you can't put this in the book. It's like, I really struggled with popcorn. And they're like, oh my gosh, people are going to, and people I'm sure are laughing that I'm like, oh, I had a popcorn addiction, but I did. And so it's not in the book because it's not life-threatening, and there are people with addictions that are life-threatening. The method goes like this. You take, and I think it'll be more relatable if I pick, like, say, drinking soda. That'll be more relatable. So say you want to stop drinking soda. What you would first do is look at all the tangles that surround that. Oh, I drink soda for breakfast. Some people do that. I drink soda during my break. And so write down all the times that you drink soda during the day. Consider those like tangles in the tangled knot. Then you look at the list. And oh, by the way, that is the only time in my method where you're going to feel a little bit bad. So I'm just warning people, warning you.
Right.
And then don't stop there. Find the one that's easiest to untangle. Like, oh, I really can, morning break. Yeah, I can do coffee rather than soda. I'm going to untangle that one. So you pick the easiest one to untangle. Then you go to the next easiest one, and then the next easiest one. Just like with a tangled phone cord, you don't go to the middle and try to untangle that. You go to the easiest one, and it's a process. So that's the process I map out in Tiny Habits. And in the back of the book, I have 3 pages of flowcharts in the appendix if people want to get really geeky about it.
Yeah, I geeked out on that. It was good stuff. Yeah, it's cool.
That's my favorite part of the book.
Me too.
People
it's
don't
intense.
But it's step by step. And if it works, do this. If it doesn't work, do this. And if that works, do this. If that doesn't work, do this. So it's a system. It's a system, and you're not guessing. And in this case, the behavior change master plans in the back of the book is to help you untangle these unwanted habits.
I think what's cool about this book is that you treat behavior with curiosity, right? And with exploration. You sort of view behavior as a bit of a puzzle that you're trying to solve. And how can people listening maybe identify the right new habits for them?
I'm going to give the fast forward version. I just, a month ago, and I've not fully publicized this yet, I've created an online tool that's free, and it works best on mobile phones and tablets at tinyhabits.com/recipes. tinyhabits.com/recipes. There is a web-based tool. You can use any browser, and it's free. And you can just go and pick, well, what new habit do I want? And it's in categories like stress and brain health and sleep and so on. And then you find what you can anchor it to. And so it helps you design your tiny habit recipe really, really quickly. That's the fastest way. There's a more, I don't want to say it's longer, it takes more time, but there is a more involved way that I talk about in the book where you magic wand, like if you want to sleep better, yes, you can go to the recipe maker at tinyhabits.com/recipes. Or you could say, okay, if I could wave a magic wand, get myself to do any habit that would lead me to sleep better, and just start listing those. Oh, I would stop watching TV at 6. I would stop drinking coffee at 2:00. I would have the habit of putting on blue blocking glasses at this time. And I call that a swarm of behaviors. And then you pick a few that are the best ones for you. And I call those golden behaviors. So that's a more precise, involved process. But the shortcut is just going online and using the Tiny Habit recipe maker.
That sounds cool. I'm going to check that out. That's neat. You know, and you talked about this, right? But I just want to make sure that our listeners sort of grab this. And it was a big aha for me is when you use existing routine in your life to prompt the new habit. Roll that out a little bit, because I just think it's a powerful but yet simple way to help people.
This was something I discovered in 2010 in hacking behavior. I gave a TED talk on this, so I won't go into the details, but what struck me in a moment of getting out of the shower, yes, one of these famous shower and ahas,
right,
was after. If you know what the habit comes after, then you can use your existing routine to remind you. So if I know that filling the glass of water comes after I start the coffee maker, well, then I can just sequence it in to my existing routine. So I call that anchoring. And I called it anchoring because you're attaching this new habit to something that's very, very stable. Now, other people have taken that concept and they've renamed it as stacking or piggybacking. It's the same concept, but people have just renamed it. But the breakthrough here is the idea that you can use what you already do to prompt to remind you to do the new habit. And so you're designing it. It's like, here's all the routines I do in my day. You're saying, where does this one slide in? Where do I slot this one in? And if it doesn't work there, that's okay. Because in Tiny Habits, you are designing, and part of that's iterating. Wow, filling my glass of water didn't fit after I start the coffee maker. Maybe it comes right after, let's say I start the dishwasher, or right after I say goodbye to my spouse, or right after I floss my teeth. So you're exploring in a design way, not a willpower, not a discipline way. It's design. How do I design this into my existing routine?
What if you want to help other people create better habits in their lives, right? How would we put our tiny hats on, our Tiny Habits hats on, and sort of lean into that?
How do we help others around us change their habits? And I want to answer this with broader guidelines. Yes, Tiny Habits will work for them. Yes, there's a whole chapter in the book where I talk about how do you help others change, and especially you're changing together. But the two overriding principles, number one, help that person do what she or he already wants to do. So if they don't want to stop drinking soda, don't start there. If they don't want to do burpees, don't do that. Help them do what they already want to do. And I know people are thinking, well, oh no, what they really need to do is stop drinking soda and drink water instead. Yes, but change leads to change. And as they create habits in areas they want, maybe it's productivity, tidiness, sleep, they will develop the skills of change, and their fear around change will be reduced. So you increase ability and increase motivation, and they'll be more skillful. So they'll be more open to taking on things they would have been afraid to. So number one is help people do what they already want to do. Start them where they want to start. Number two is to help that person feel successful. Now, we talked about the role of emotions, and in part, helping them feel successful will help the habit wire in. But it will also motivate them to continue, and it will also help their identity shift. It's that feeling of success in a domain. Like if I feel successful in eating a healthy snack, even though it's tiny, it's just a little thing, that feeling will change how I think about myself. So it's so important to help that person feel successful. There's a lot of ways to do that, but those are the overriding principles right there. And I call those maxims.
Yeah, I know. And I love your maxims. Help people do what they want to do and help people feel successful. I love them. Let me ask you this. What kind of training, like there's ways that people can get a little bit more involved with your work, big and small ways, your boot camp. Talk about that for a minute for folks, BJ.
Over the years, I put a lot of stuff out there that's free and you can access. And I'll just confess, Molly, it's not that well organized. There's videos here and lots of tweets there, and I have too many websites and all that, just in my effort to share and just get it out there. And of course, the free 5-day program in Tiny Habits, that's something people can do. It's a 45-minute experience start to finish. So over the course of a week, you're investing 45 minutes. That's great. The trainings that I offer that people pay for, so all that's free. The paid for training, there's 2 types. One is if people want to be a coach and use the Tiny Habits method, whether it's a life coach or fitness or productivity, there's a certification that my sister and I run in the Tiny Habits method. And it's wonderful. It's great. It happens online. It's hands-on. And then you become part of the Tiny Habits coach community. The other training I offer is quite different. And I call it my boot camp in behavior design. And that's not about Tiny Habits. It's about my broader work. And that's for people that are creating their own products and services to help people change. And the people that come to that might work for very big companies. And let's say they're trying to create a financial product to help people save money, or a product for a health organization to help people eat differently. Or maybe they're doing a startup, but they want to create a product that influences behavior. That's my boot camp. And that's my favorite. It's 12 people. And so I do one a month. It's 16 hours of training spread out over 4 weeks. And right now it's on Zoom. When we can get back together in person, we'll do some on Zoom and some in person at my guest home on the Russian River. And so those are the 2 ways.
All right, well, so we end with rapid fire. I'm going to hit you with a couple quick ones, and you ready?
Well, I don't know. By design, Molly, I didn't prep for these questions. I just wanted to be spontaneous. Let's see what happens.
Well, I don't think we gave them to you, by the way.
Oh, good. Then I didn't.
Yeah,
I didn't
just
prepare.
so you know, you didn't have them, so no problem. All right, what's the last book you read?
Oh, I read Robert Cialdini's new book. He has added 200 pages to his classic book, Influence. And tomorrow, I'm getting him a blurb that he can use to help promote the book. Oh my gosh, people, this book was such a landmark, and he's gone above and beyond.
Oh, wow. Sure. A book you recommend most often, besides Tiny Habits, of course.
I'm going to give a strange one for this audience. Don't Shoot the Dog.
What is this about?
Karen Pryor wrote a dog training book, but it's really about behaviorism.
Okay.
And, operant conditioning. It's the easiest, fastest, most fun way to get your head around how behaviorism and operant conditioning can be applied in everyday life, and not just to dogs, to kids, to yourself, to your employees. It's a terrific book.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. What's your favorite app or maybe another resource you'd share?
I'm just crushing on 2 right now. One is Notion, which is sort of like Evernote, but simpler and better. And one of my students is the COO and another one's BizDev Lead. So, and it's really wonderful. I'm not just using it because my students are involved. It really is terrific.
It helps. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I'll check them out.
The other one I'm crushing on is Clubhouse.
Oh, I know, right? I just joined that too. It's pretty cool, isn't it?
One of my students is the co-founder of Clubhouse.
You're kidding.
Just like one of my students was co-founder of Instagram.
Jeez.
And
I guess that's who comes out of Stanford, huh?
Clubhouse is such a wonderful,
it's cool,
new thing into the world by connecting us with real-time voice. And actually, the class I'm teaching at Stanford in spring is about Clubhouse for behavior change. Like, how do we help people? And Notion. So we're combining those 2 things together, and that's going to be those are the tools we're going to use in the class. And we're going to figure out, how do we help people change habits and behavior through Clubhouse?
That's awesome. What's your favorite tiny habit that you practice?
There's so many. I'll pick a strange one. Every morning I get up and I say, it's going to be a great day. I love that one. But the one that might surprise people is I go out into our living room and I sit down in the dark and I get out one of my flutes. It's really a tenor recorder. It's very flute-like. And I just sit there and play in the dark.
Wow.
And it's almost like a meditation because it's breathing. So I can just do it for a little bit, but I can go as long as I want. This morning, I probably played 30 or 40 minutes.
Wow.
On 3 or 4 different recorders and just kind of came up with my own songs. Some mornings I'll have Alexa play like Joni Mitchell or Billy Joel, and I'll play along with that. So it's playing a musical instrument in the morning. Mm-hmm. What a great way
to start your day. Oh, that's cool. That's neat. And what is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
So this is probably 20 years ago. I'm at Stanford, and my research lab is in this kind of center that has a patio in the middle between these two buildings. And I'm sitting out in the patio, or I'm walking in the patio, and a guy named Patrick Suppies walks by, and he's like super famous. Mm-hmm. In fact, now one of the buildings is named after him. He's right. Super fast. And I knew who he was. I didn't think he knew who I was at all. And he maybe didn't. And he just walked up to me and he said something like, I forgot the exact quote, but he basically said, the key is to make your work actionable. Make it so people can take action. And I was like, okay. I mean, I don't even remember what I said, but it just really struck me that that was important, and that somebody like Patrick Suppies, who has had such an impact, would somehow just come to me and say, make sure that your work is actionable. And so now fast forward, tiny habits, I'm huge on simplicity. So I think, and that aligned with my thinking to some extent, but so much in academics is about complexity, and it's going to be obscure, and it's going to be counterintuitive. And, there's forces that would take you that direction, because there's certain kinds of prestige, like the more abstract it is, like within computer science, the more abstract it is, the more prestige you get for it. And the more practical it is, the more it's like, well, so what? So for him to give me an okay on, it's okay to do research and work that is practical and people can apply, that was really important to me.
Mm-hmm. Gal, and you've done that. So the show's called Game Changers. So one last question. Who or what is a game changer that inspires you, and why?
The thing that I've been fascinated with for decades, even before Tiny Habits, was what's the simplest thing that can have the biggest impact? And my colleague David Noah and I call that the feather principle. And so when I think of people who have changed the game for me, it's in this way: Mozart, Picasso, Calder, even Charles Schultz, the Peanuts guy. All of those people, I mean, they're not behavior scientists, but what they did with their art or their domain is they could write a melody that was so simple and so powerful. They could do visual works of art or a cartoon, 3 frames in a cartoon, that so simple but so powerful. So for me to have to have my eye on people who can just do something like Picasso, just a quick line, and it's like, that evokes so much, that's massively inspiring for me.
Here are a few of my most memorable takeaways from today's conversation. Number 1, keep it simple. Simplicity is the key to behavior change. My favorite tip from BJ is that you can leverage an existing routine to design a new habit, right? Here's the prompt. After I fill in the blank, I will fill in the blank. For example, after I start the coffee maker, I will fill my water bottle. Number 2, lower the bar. It seems counterintuitive, but keeping the bar low, you will naturally be motivated to do more. Making your habits tiny is key, because even on the hardest days, you can still succeed and keep the habit alive. Number 3, make it fun. BJ talks a lot about how emotions create habits. So much of how we normally think about habits wraps up in feelings of guilt and of blame. But you change best by feeling good, not by feeling bad. Celebrate your tiny successes and you'll keep going. Thanks, as always, for listening to Game Changers with Molly Fletcher. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts. There you can listen to previous episodes and leave us a review, which helps other people find out about the show. This episode was edited and sound designed by the team at Sound On Studios. You can find out more about their work at soundonsoundoff.com. Check it out. For more about me, visit mollyfletcher.com. Until next time, stay curious and be bold.